How long until Europe becomes a third-world continent? Europe once stood for civilization, reason, and order. It was the heart of the Enlightenment, the cradle of democracy, the engine of scientific progress. But today the signs of decline are everywhere. What if the collapse of Europe isn't a distant dystopia, but a process already underway? What if the so-called First World is slowly becoming indistinguishable from the very societies it once sought to civilize? This isn't just a metaphor. Across the continent, we see symptoms usually associated with the Third World. Institutional dysfunction, ethnic strife, unsustainable inequality, and parallel societies. And the engine behind this transformation? Mass migration, coupled with political cowardice, cultural amnesia, and elite denial. So the question is not if Europe will decline, but how long it has before becoming unrecognizable. How long until it becomes, in practical terms, a third-world continent? Let us begin by defining our terms. The Third World, originally a Cold War label for non-aligned countries, has evolved to mean something deeper. Societies marked by political instability, fragile institutions, tribal loyalties, poverty, crime, and deep societal fragmentation. When we speak of Europe becoming Third World, we don't mean that London or Paris will look like Mogadishu overnight. We mean the gradual erosion of the civic, social, and institutional order that defined the West. Take the suburbs of Paris or the banlieue of Marseille. These are no longer French cities in any meaningful sense. The language, the customs, even the law have changed. Police do not patrol certain neighborhoods. Firefighters are ambushed. Teachers are beheaded. This is not a caricature. This is the daily reality for millions. In Sweden, the once placid welfare state now grapples with gun violence, clan-based criminal networks, and car bombings. Cities like Malmö and Gothenburg have seen a dramatic transformation, driven by migration policies that ignored integration, accountability, or cultural cohesion. The very systems built to guarantee equality and peace are now being used to house, subsidize, and tolerate the forces that undermine them. And in Belgium, entire areas of Brussels are effectively beyond the reach of the state. In Molenbeek, young men born and raised in Europe express open contempt for European values. Sharia is practiced unofficially. Integration is no longer expected. It's not even discussed. The assumption is that parallel cultures will coexist indefinitely. But coexistence without common ground eventually becomes confrontation. This is where the concept of Brazilianization becomes crucial. Coined to describe the emergence of a dual society, one where the rich live in fortified enclaves, while the poor are left in neglected, lawless zones. Brazilianization is no longer limited to Latin America. In European cities today, you see gated communities, private security firms, and a rising culture of surveillance, not in response to foreign threats, but to internal collapse. The middle class, once the backbone of European stability, is shrinking. Social mobility is slowing, and for the native working class, their neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals are no longer familiar. They are the ones who feel the transformation most directly. Yet they are the ones dismissed as xenophobic for speaking out. Some observers have gone further, describing the transformation as a form of Africanization. Not in terms of race, but in terms of institutional decay, tribal politics, and the erosion of national unity. Africanization refers to the pattern seen in many post-colonial states. The replacement of civic identity with ethnic or religious loyalty, the breakdown of the rule of law, and the rise of corruption disguised as cultural sensitivity. When the state begins to favor group identity over individual rights, when justice bends to tribal appeasement, and when competence is replaced by quota, then we are witnessing the Africanization of a Western society. But Africanization is only one part of the equation. The other is Balkanization, the fragmentation of society into hostile, competing identity groups. Europe, built on the promise of unity, is now splintering. Ethnic blocs vote as tribes. Neighborhoods segregate by culture, not class. Civic identity, French, German, Belgian, becomes meaningless when millions do not identify with the nation at all. This is not just a cultural issue. It is a political time bomb. The Yugoslav wars began not because of poverty, but because ethnic coexistence without unity eventually failed. Balkanization brings instability not only to cities but to national politics. Governments, increasingly reliant on migrant voting blocs, adopt policies that favor appeasement over principle. And dissent, even polite, reasoned dissent, is criminalized. In this climate, free speech erodes, law enforcement retreats, schools abandon core curriculum in favor of cultural relativism, and native Europeans, especially the young, begin to ask themselves whether they even have a future in their own homelands. Demographically, the transformation is accelerating. According to demographer Eric Kaufman, native populations will become minorities in many major European cities by mid-century. London already fits this model. So does Amsterdam. So do Brussels and Frankfurt. These are not predictions. They are census data. And as these demographic shifts continue, the political pressure to maintain failing systems will grow. Welfare programs originally built for homogeneous, high-trust societies will collapse under the weight of cultural divergence and dependency. Schools will no longer transmit a coherent national culture. Police will be forced to navigate complex, culturally sensitive landscapes where enforcing the law becomes an act of political risk. The European elite, of course, sees none of this. They live in protected neighborhoods, send their children to private schools, and outsource their fear to the masses. They preach tolerance from behind walls, and they label any resistance as hate. But the people are waking up. Across Europe, resistance movements are growing, not because of hate, but because of survival. The populist right, the identitarian left, and even some centrists are beginning to acknowledge what is becoming undeniable. The system is cracking, and mass migration, unfiltered and unassimilated, is not enriching Europe. It is replacing it. So how long do we have, if trends continue? Demographically, socially, politically. Then by 2040 or 2050, Europe will contain vast zones that function no differently from failed states. There will still be wealth, beauty, and culture in pockets. But the idea of a unified Western Europe, cohesive, confident, and proud, will be gone. What replaces it is unclear. It could be civil unrest. It could be political balkanization, countries fractured into irreconcilable internal blocks. It could be a soft totalitarianism that tries to hold everything together through censorship and repression. Or perhaps something more hopeful. Perhaps this period of collapse is not a death, but a warning, a civilizational low point before renewal. But renewal can only come when the truth is faced. Europe must stop lying to itself. Diversity is not always a strength. Borders matter. Culture matters. And a civilization that forgets who it is, that forgets its history, its values, and its people, will not survive. The Third World is not coming to Europe. In many places, it is already here. The question now is, will Europe become it? Or will it remember what made it great in the first place?